The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Elder Kveth of the Vornathi delegation rose from his crystalline throne. His bioluminescent tendrils flickered with urgency as he addressed the assembled representatives of 17 spacefaring civilizations. "Honored members of the Council," Kveth began, his translator rendering his chemical speech patterns into the common tongue, "I must speak regarding the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel. The creatures from the third planet of the Sol system, the ones who call themselves humans." Murmurs rippled through the vast chamber. The Vornathi were ancient, their civilization spanning nearly 1,000,000 years. When they spoke, others listened, usually. "My people have observed this species for 3 of their centuries," Kveth continued. "We have studied their history, their conflicts, their art, and their science. And I stand before you today with a single warning." His tendrils pulsed a deep crimson, the Vornathi equivalent of extreme caution. "Do not anger the humans." Laughter erupted from the Krethnok delegation. Ambassador Thorvax, a massive reptilian creature covered in armored scales, slammed his clawed fist against his podium. "You expect us to fear these soft-skinned primitives? They barely discovered atomic energy 200 of their years ago." "That is precisely my point," Kveth replied, his voice steady. "Consider what they have accomplished in those 200 years. Consider what they do to themselves and to each other when angered." "They are meat," Thorvax sneered. "Fragile, short-lived meat. The Krethnok have conquered species 1,000 times more formidable." Kveth's tendrils shifted to a pale yellow, sadness mixed with resignation. "Then you were not listening, Ambassador. I did not say they were powerful. I did not say they were technologically superior. I said, do not anger them. There is a difference you fail to comprehend." The council session continued, with Kveth's warning largely dismissed. The humans were granted provisional membership in the galactic community. Their small fleet of 12 FTL-capable vessels, a laughable addition to the armadas that protected civilized space. Within a standard year, humanity had established trade relationships with 6 different species, their adaptability and creativity proving valuable despite their technological limitations. They traded in art, in music, in stories, cultural exports that spread through the galaxy like a pleasant virus. And, for a time, there was peace. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Endeavour, humanity's newest and most advanced exploration vessel. At 200 meters long, it was considered a toy by galactic standards. The Krethnok's smallest patrol craft was 3 times its size. But Elena loved her ship. It was home. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal," Lieutenant Chen reported from the communication station. It's coming from the colony on Kepler 442b, New Helsinki." Elena's blood ran cold. New Helsinki was humanity's first extrasolar colony, home to nearly 50,000 souls. Put it through. The speakers crackled with static before a terrified voice emerged. "This is Administrator Johansson of New Helsinki Colony. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Unknown vessels have entered our system and begun orbital bombardment. Our shields are failing. We need immediate." The transmission cut to static. "Get me everything," Elena commanded, her voice hard as steel. "Sensor data, communication logs, anything the buoys picked up before they went dark." The bridge crew scrambled to comply. Within minutes, they had pieced together a picture that made Elena's stomach turn. 3 massive vessels, their design matching no known galactic species, had dropped out of FTL directly above New Helsinki. Without warning, without communication, they had begun firing. The colony's defensive grid, designed to protect against asteroids and small debris, had held for approximately 17 minutes. Then the bombardment intensified. "How many made it to the emergency bunkers?" Elena asked quietly. Lieutenant Chen's hands trembled as he analyzed the data. Based on the population distribution at the time of attack, maybe 12,000? 15 if they were lucky. Elena closed her eyes. 35,000 people. Farmers, scientists, children. Gone in less than half an hour. "Take us there," she ordered. "Maximum speed." When the Endeavour arrived at Kepler 442b, they found nothing but ash and silence. The colony had been beautiful once. Elena had visited during its founding ceremony 5 years ago. Rolling green hills, crystal-clear lakes, forests filled with alien life that was somehow compatible with Earth biology. The colonists had called it paradise. Now it was a graveyard. The attacking vessels had been thorough. Every structure had been reduced to rubble. The forests had been burned to bedrock. Even the lakes had been boiled away, leaving behind cracked and smoking basins where fish had once swum. And scattered among the destruction were bodies, thousands of them. Elena ordered a ground team to search for survivors. They found 123 people huddled in a deep mining shaft that the attackers had somehow missed. 123 out of 50,000. Among the survivors was a young girl named Mira. She was 7 years old. She had watched from the shaft entrance as the fire came down from the sky and consumed her parents. She hadn't spoken a word since. Elena held the child in her arms as the rescue shuttles carried them away from the ruins. She looked down at Mira's face, smeared with ash, eyes empty, small body trembling with shock she couldn't express. Something changed in Elena Vasquez in that moment. Something fundamental shifted in the core of her being. She had been a soldier once before becoming an explorer. She had seen war. She had killed in defense of her homeworld and her species. But she had always believed in peace, in diplomacy, in the possibility that beings could settle their differences without violence. Looking at Mira's face, she found that belief harder to hold on to. The Endeavour raced back to Earth at speeds that pushed her engines past their theoretical limits. Elena didn't care. If the ship broke apart, at least she would have tried. Word of the attack had preceded her. By the time she arrived in the Sol system, humanity was already mobilizing. United Earth Command had been a largely ceremonial organization since first contact. Humanity's unified military force maintained more for tradition than necessity. In the 3 years since joining the galactic community, they had focused on exploration and defense, believing the great powers of the galaxy would protect them. That belief died with New Helsinki. Admiral Marcus Stone was waiting for Elena when she docked at Armstrong Station. He was a tall man, his dark skin weathered by decades of service, his eyes carrying a weight that matched her own. "Tell me everything," he said. Elena did. She showed him the sensor data, the communication logs, the recordings from the survivors. She showed him Mira, still silent, still trembling, now in the care of the station's medical staff. When she finished, Admiral Stone stood in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do we know who did this?" "No, sir. The ship designs don't match any known species. Either they're from beyond explored space, or someone went to great lengths to hide their identity." "And the Galactic Council?" Elena's jaw tightened. "They've expressed concern and promised to investigate. Ambassador Chen says they're treating it as a piracy incident. An unfortunate crime, but not a matter for the full council. Admiral Stone nodded slowly. I see. Sir, Elena said, her voice hard, 50,000 people are dead. Children are dead, and the council wants to file a report. I understand, Captain. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I understand how anyone could look at what happened and call it unfortunate. Admiral Stone met her gaze. What would you have us do, Captain? Elena didn't hesitate. Find them. Find whoever did this, and make them pay. For the first time, the Admiral smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we're thinking alike. Come with me. There's something you need to see. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, hidden from both human civilians and galactic observers, was a facility that didn't officially exist. Admiral Stone led Elena through a series of security checkpoints, each more rigorous than the last, until they stood before a massive blast door. What you're about to see is classified beyond any level you've previously held, Stone said. After New Helsinki, the Security Council decided you needed to know. You and every captain in the fleet. The door opened. Elena stepped into a cavern so vast it seemed impossible. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, filled with ships. Not the small exploration vessels of humanity's public fleet. These were warships. Massive, sleek, and bristling with weapons. Project Prometheus, Stone explained as they walked among the metal giants. After first contact, the Security Council realized something. The galaxy is not a friendly place. Species have risen and fallen for millions of years, and the strong survive by being prepared for the worst. How many? Elena asked, her voice awed. 800 vessels, ranging from frigates to dreadnoughts. Another 300 under construction. We've been building in secret for 3 years, using materials purchased through shell corporations and fabricated in automated facilities across the asteroid belt. The Council knows nothing. As far as they're concerned, humanity is a minor species with a dozen ships and no military ambitions. Stone stopped before the largest vessel in the cavern, a dreadnought nearly 2 kilometers long, its hull bristling with weapon systems Elena didn't recognize. This is the Retribution. She's been waiting for a purpose. Elena stared at the massive ship. What now? Now we find out who killed our people. And then, Stone's eyes went cold. Then we remind the galaxy why predators learn to fear the night on Earth. Because we weren't the prey. We were the thing that hunted the predators. The investigation began in earnest. Humanity's intelligence services, once focused on internal matters, turned their attention outward. They infiltrated galactic communication networks, bribed officials, planted agents on a dozen different worlds. Within 3 months, they had their answer. The attack on New Helsinki had been carried out by a species called the Zorith, a civilization of silicon-based life forms who occupied a region of space far from established galactic trade routes. They were expansionist, aggressive, and utterly contemptuous of carbon-based life. But they hadn't acted alone. The Zorath had been hired. Mercenaries, paid to destroy the colony and eliminate its population. The payment had come through a series of intermediaries, but humanity's hackers were relentless. They traced the money through 17 different shell accounts across 9 different worlds. The trail led to the Krethnok. Ambassador Thorvax, it seemed, had decided that humanity was unworthy of galactic citizenship. The new species had been rising too fast, making too many friends, becoming too influential. In Krethnok culture, the solution to such problems was simple: eliminate the competition before it could become a threat. New Helsinki had been a message, a warning that humanity should know its place. When Admiral Stone received the intelligence report, he read it 3 times. Then he called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Security Council. "We have confirmation," he told the assembled leaders. "The Krethnok funded the attack. Ambassador Thorvax authorized the payment personally." President Chen, no relation to Lieutenant Chen, leaned back in her chair. She was a small woman, soft-spoken, known for her diplomatic skills. But in this moment, her eyes held something dark. "What are our options?" Stone glanced at his tactical advisors before responding. "We could pursue diplomatic channels, present our evidence to the Galactic Council, and demand justice." And what would that justice look like? Based on precedent, economic sanctions, perhaps a formal censure. The Krethnok are a founding member of the Council. They have significant influence. So, essentially, nothing. President Chen's voice was flat. 50,000 dead, and they would pay a fine? That is the most likely outcome, yes. What else? Stone hesitated. "Madam President, I must advise caution. The Krethnok have the largest military in known space. Their fleet numbers in the tens of thousands. Even with Project Prometheus, we would be outnumbered 50 to 1. "Admiral, I did not ask for caution. I asked for options." Stone nodded slowly. "Then we have another choice. We could go to war." The room erupted in chaos. Cabinet members shouting over each other, military advisors demanding to be heard, diplomats pleading for restraint. President Chen let it continue for exactly 30 seconds before raising her hand. Silence fell. "Admiral Stone," she said quietly, "if we go to war, can we win?" Stone considered the question carefully. By conventional military metrics, no. The Krethnok have overwhelming numerical superiority. Their ships are larger, their weapons more powerful, their industrial capacity vastly greater than ours. But we have something they don't. Stone pulled up a holographic display showing the layout of Krethnok space. 18 months ago, we began developing a new class of weapon. It's based on technology recovered from a derelict ship we found in the outer system, a vessel from a species that died out before the Krethnok achieved spaceflight. What kind of weapon? A directed quantum destabilization field. When activated, it causes a cascade failure in any matter within its range. Ships, stations, planets, nothing is immune. President Chen's eyes widened. "A planet killer?" "Yes, ma'am. We have 3 currently operational, with another dozen in production." The room went silent again. This time, nobody seemed to know what to say. Finally, Vice President Morrison spoke. "You're talking about genocide, the annihilation of an entire species." "I'm talking about options," Stone replied. "The President asked, and I answered. What we do with those options is not a military decision." President Chen stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of Geneva glittered in the darkness. Humanity's birthworld, spinning peacefully in the void. "Do you know what the Krethnok call us?" she asked. "I read Ambassador Thorvax's private communications. He calls us meat, soft-skinned primitives, animals pretending to be civilized." She turned back to face the room. 50,000 of our people are dead because someone decided we didn't matter, that we weren't worth the effort of communication or negotiation. or even the basic courtesy of a warning. They killed our people because they could, because they thought we were too weak to respond.
Her voice hardened.
They were wrong. The Galactic Council was in session when humanity's ambassador requested an emergency audience. Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo was a former professor of xenolinguistics, selected for her diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity. She had spent 2 years building relationships throughout the galactic community, earning a reputation as a reasonable and moderate voice. Today, she was not feeling reasonable. "Honored members of the Council," she began, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "I bring grave news from the United Earth Government. 3 months ago, our colony on Kepler 442b was attacked without warning or provocation. 50,000 of our citizens were killed." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We have concluded our investigation into this attack. We have identified the species responsible, a group called the Zoroth, mercenaries from beyond your borders. But more importantly, we have identified who paid them." Ambassador Okonkwo turned to face the Krethnok delegation directly. "Ambassador Thorvax, would you like to explain to this council why your government funded the murder of 50,000 innocent people?" The chamber erupted. Delegations shouted in a dozen different languages, translators struggling to keep up with the chaos. Thorvax rose to his full height, nearly 3 meters of armored muscle, and roared for silence. "These accusations are baseless," he bellowed. "Human lies designed to smear the noble Krethnok Imperium." "We have records," Okonkwo replied calmly. "Financial transactions traced through 17 intermediaries, ultimately leading to accounts controlled by your government. We have communications, your communications, Ambassador, discussing the meat problem and the need to cull the herd before it grows too large." "Fabrications!" "Then you won't mind if we present this evidence to an independent tribunal." Okonkwo's voice was ice. "I'm sure the council would be happy to conduct a full investigation." Thorvax hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his reptilian features. Elder Keveth rose from his crystalline throne. "I believe," he said slowly, "that such an investigation would be illuminating. The Vornathi would be willing to oversee the process to ensure impartiality." The suggestion was a trap, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The Vornathi were incorruptible. Their biology made them incapable of deception. If they examined the evidence and found it genuine, the Krethnok would have no recourse. Thorvax's scales flushed with anger. "The Krethnok do not submit to the judgment of others. We are the premier military power in this galaxy. We do not answer to primitives and their ancient allies." "Then you admit your guilt?" Keveth asked mildly. "I admit nothing, but I will not participate in this farce." Thorvax turned to face the chamber. "Let me make something clear to all of you. The Krethnok have protected this galaxy for 10,000 years. We have crushed threats that would have consumed your precious civilizations. We do not apologize. We do not explain. And we do not bow to the demands of soft-skinned animals who learned to walk upright barely 10,000 generations ago." He pointed a clawed finger at Ambassador Okonkwo. "If the humans want justice, let them come and take it. We will crush them as we have crushed every other species foolish enough to challenge us." The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Very well, Ambassador. We will do exactly that." She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the silence stretched on. 2 weeks later, humanity declared war on the Krethnok Imperium. The galactic community watched in stunned disbelief as 12 human vessels, the only ships they knew existed, departed from Earth space and set course for Krethnok territory. It was suicide, madness. The Krethnok had ships that could destroy fleets. Their smallest patrol craft outgunned anything humanity publicly possessed. The betting pools gave humanity approximately 6 hours of survival. What the galaxy didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that those 12 ships were a distraction, a sacrifice designed to draw attention while the real fleet moved into position. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the stars streak past as his dreadnought led 700 warships through uncharted space. They had taken a route that avoided all known sensor networks, traveling through regions that galactic civilization had written off as impassable. Humans, it turned out, had a different definition of impassable. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "we're approaching the Krethnok frontier. Long-range sensors show minimal defensive presence. Most of their fleet has been redeployed to meet our decoy force." Stone nodded. "Exactly as planned. What about the secondary targets?" "Confirmed locations on all 3. Industrial complexes, shipyards, and their central military command station, all undefended." "Then let's get to work." The human fleet split into 7 battle groups, each assigned a specific target. They struck simultaneously, appearing out of FTL directly above their objectives and opening fire before the Krethnok could even begin to respond. The first Krethnok realized something was wrong when 3 of their largest shipyard complexes simply vanished. Thousands of vessels under construction, decades of industrial capacity, gone in minutes. The human weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, not merely destructive, but absolute. Ships didn't explode, they ceased to exist. When the attack ended, the Krethnok had lost nearly 40% of their military production capacity. And humanity was just getting started. High Warlord Kethrak received the reports with growing horror. This wasn't possible. The humans had 12 ships, 12 primitive vessels barely capable of interstellar travel. They couldn't have. But they had. "How many attackers?" he demanded. His communications officer trembled. "Reports are conflicting, High Warlord. Initial estimates suggested 30 vessels, but the damage patterns indicate hundreds." "Hundreds? Where did they get hundreds of ships?" "We don't know, High Warlord. They appeared without warning and disappeared the same way. Our forces never even got a clear scan." Kethrak slammed his fist against his command throne. "Find them! Find their fleet and destroy it!" "High Warlord, there's more." "What?" The communications officers swallowed hard. "They're broadcasting a message to the entire galaxy." "Show me." The main view screen flickered to life, showing a human female in a military uniform. Her face was calm, almost peaceful, but her eyes held something that made Kethrak's scales crawl. "People of the Krethnok Imperium," she said, "my name is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Navy. 2 months ago, your government murdered 50,000 of my people, men, women, and children who had never harmed you, who had never even heard of your species. You did this because you thought we were weak. You did this because you thought we couldn't fight back. You did this because you believed yourselves to be predators and us to be prey." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but somehow her eyes grew colder.
You were wrong.
We are not diplomats. We are not philosophers. We are the descendants of creatures who killed mammoths with sticks, who tamed fire and bent it to our will, who walked on our moon because we refused to accept that the sky was the limit. We are not prey. We are what prey became when it grew tired of being hunted. To the people of the Krethnok Imperium, your government started this war. We intend to finish it. Surrender your leaders, submit to justice, and this ends now. Resist, and we will burn your worlds until nothing remains but ash and memory. You have 72 hours to decide. The message ended. Kethrak stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. These creatures think they can threaten us? The Krethnok Imperium has stood for 10,000 years. We have crushed species that could break these primitives without effort. He turned to his assembled officers. Find their fleet. Find their homeworld. Show them what happens when vermin dare to challenge their betters. Admiral Stone received the Krethnok response exactly as he had expected: violence. 3,000 warships, the largest fleet the Imperium had assembled in centuries, set course for Earth at maximum speed. They never arrived. The human fleet was waiting for them in a system designated KR-4427, a worthless collection of barren rocks that the Krethnok had never bothered to map. When the enemy armada dropped out of FTL to refuel, they found themselves surrounded. "Admiral," Stone's tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet is in range. They're attempting to form defensive formations." "Don't give them time. All ships, open fire." 700 human vessels unleashed their weapons simultaneously. The quantum destabilization beams, smaller versions of the planet killers, tore through Krethnok shields like they weren't there. Ships that had survived centuries of conflict simply disappeared. The Krethnok commanders tried to respond. Their vessels were powerful, their weapons devastating, but they were fighting an enemy they didn't understand, an enemy that didn't play by the rules of galactic warfare. Human ships were faster, their crews more adaptable. While the Krethnok relied on overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, the humans employed tactics that the reptilian species had never encountered. They used hit-and-run attacks, appearing out of FTL, to strike at vulnerable points before vanishing again. They coordinated in ways that seemed almost telepathic, individual captains making decisions that complemented each other perfectly, as if guided by a single will. And they fought with a ferocity that the Krethnok had never imagined possible. When a human vessel was damaged beyond repair, its crew didn't surrender. They rammed their ship into the nearest enemy, taking as many of the enemy with them as possible. When boarding parties met in the corridors of captured vessels, the humans fought with hands and teeth even after their weapons ran dry. The Krethnok had conquered 100 species. They had never faced anything like this. By the time the battle ended, the great fleet of the Imperium had been reduced to a few hundred scattered survivors fleeing into the void. The rest, nearly 3,000 vessels, were gone. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, simply erased, their atoms scattered across the void. Admiral Stone looked at the tactical display, watching the last enemy ships vanish into FTL. His face showed no satisfaction, no triumph, only cold determination. "Set course for Krath Prime," he ordered. "It's time to end this." Krath Prime was the heart of the Krethnok Imperium, a massive world, nearly 3 times the size of Earth. It was home to nearly 20 billion of the reptilian species. For 10,000 years, it had been the seat of their power, the center of their civilization, the jewel of their empire. When the human fleet arrived, its skies turned black with warships. High Warlord Kethrak had gathered every vessel the Imperium had left. Nearly 5,000 ships scraped together from patrol routes and garrison duties across their territory. It was still a formidable force, enough to crush most galactic powers. Against humanity, it wasn't enough. The battle for Krath Prime lasted 6 hours. The Krethnok fought with desperate fury, defending their homeworld with everything they had. Individual captains performed acts of heroism that would be remembered in their people's songs for generations. None of it mattered. By the time the sun set on the capital city of Krathvel, the human fleet had achieved total orbital superiority. Admiral Stone's vessels hung in the sky like harbingers of doom, their weapons trained on the world below. And then, instead of firing, they waited. On the surface of Krath Prime, High Warlord Kethrak watched the enemy fleet through the viewport of his bunker. His scales were pale, a sign of exhaustion and fear that he would never have shown in public. Around him, his advisors waited in silence, afraid to speak. "They're not firing," one of them finally said. "Why aren't they firing?" "I don't know." Kethrak's voice was hollow. He had seen the destruction of his fleet. He had watched ships that had served the Imperium for centuries vanish like morning mist. He had witnessed the death of everything he believed about Krethnok invincibility. And he had realized, too late, that the ancient Vornathi had been right. "High Warlord," another advisor said, "we're receiving a transmission. It's from their admiral." "Show me." The screen flickered to life, showing a human male in a military uniform. His face was stern, his eyes cold, but there was something almost reluctant in his expression. "High Warlord Kethrak," the human said, "I am Admiral Marcus Stone of the United Earth Navy. I'm going to make this very simple. Your fleet is destroyed. Your industrial capacity is crippled. Your empire is in chaos, and your population is defenseless. I have 3 planet-killing weapons trained on Krath Prime, and I have the authorization to use them. I also have the authorization to accept your surrender." Stone leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear about something. I don't want to kill 20 billion people. Despite what you may believe about us, humans don't enjoy slaughter. We don't take pleasure in destruction. We would rather live in peace, trade with our neighbors, and explore the universe in friendship. But we also have a line that, when crossed, unleashes something in us that we usually try to keep buried. Something that our ancestors needed to survive when they were small and weak in a world full of predators. You crossed that line when you killed 50,000 of our people. So here are your choices, High Warlord. You can surrender. You and your military leadership will stand trial for war crimes. Your empire will be dismantled, your weapons destroyed, your species confined to this world until such time as the galactic community decides you can be trusted. It will be humiliating. It will be the end of Krethnok power as you know it. Or you can refuse. And in exactly 1 hour, Krath Prime will no longer exist. 20 billion of your people will die because you were too proud to accept defeat." Stone's expression didn't change. The choice is yours. But before you decide, I want you to think about something. Think about what you would do if you were in my position. Think about what the Kreth-Nok would do if the situations were reversed. Then ask yourself, are you surprised that we're offering you a choice at all? The transmission ended. Kethrak stared at the blank screen for a long moment. His advisors watched him, waiting for his decision. In the end, it wasn't really a decision at all. Pride was one thing, extinction was another. 15 minutes before the deadline expired, the High Warlord of the Kreth-Nok Imperium broadcast his unconditional surrender. The aftermath of the war reshaped the galaxy. The Kreth-Nok Imperium was dissolved. Its military was dismantled. Its leadership tried for crimes against sapient life. Ambassador Thormax and several other officials were found guilty and sentenced to perpetual stasis, a fate considered worse than death by their species. The ordinary Kreth-Nok people were treated more leniently. Humanity established a transitional government, working with reformist elements within their society to build something new. Within a generation, the former Imperium was on its way to becoming a functioning democracy. It wasn't perfect. There was bitterness on both sides, and the scars of war took decades to heal. But humanity proved as capable of rebuilding as they were of destroying. The Galactic Council watched all of this with a mixture of awe and terror. A species that had been dismissed as irrelevant had defeated the greatest military power in known space. They had done it in weeks, with a fleet that shouldn't have existed, using weapons that seemed like magic. And when it was over, instead of exterminating their enemies, they had shown mercy. Elder Kaveth of the Vornathi addressed the council after the peace treaty was signed. His tendrils glowed with a complex mixture of colors: satisfaction, concern, and something that might have been hope. "I warned you," he said simply. 3 years ago, I stood before this body and said, "Do not anger the humans." Now you understand why. The humans are not the strongest species in this galaxy. They are not the most ancient, or the most advanced, or the most numerous. But they possess something that we do not, something that makes them uniquely dangerous. They have the capacity for total war. When pushed far enough, when their loved ones are threatened, when their line is crossed, they transform. The poets and farmers and scientists become something else, something that fights without limits, without mercy, without the restraints that civilized species take for granted. And yet, when the fighting is done, they transform again. They help their enemies rebuild. They forgive. They move forward. This is what makes them truly terrifying. Not their weapons, not their tactics, not their technology. It is their ability to become monsters when necessary, and then to become human again when the danger has passed. Kaveth's tendrils settled into a calm blue. The humans are now a major power in this galaxy. They have earned that position through blood and sacrifice. How we treat them, how we learn from them, will determine the future of galactic civilization. Learn the lesson of the Kreth-Nok. Do not anger the humans. 10 years after the war, Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of a very different ship. The UES Hope was a diplomatic vessel, its mission to explore the unknown reaches of the galaxy and establish peaceful contact with new species. At her side stood Mira, now 17 years old. The silent girl who had survived New Helsinki had grown into a brilliant young woman, an expert in xenolinguistics who served as the ship's chief translator. She had found her voice again, eventually, though the shadows never completely left her eyes. "Captain," Lieutenant Chen reported, the same Lieutenant Chen who had served on the Endeavour all those years ago. We're approaching the coordinates. Long-range sensors show a planet with signs of advanced civilization.
Unknown species?
Appears so. No match in the database. Elena nodded. Then let's say hello. The Hope dropped out of FTL above a beautiful world of blue oceans and green continents. Within minutes, they were receiving a transmission, a first contact protocol, cautious but not hostile. They're called the Verath, Mira translated as the communication continued. They've been observing the galactic community from a distance for several centuries, but they were afraid to make contact, they say. They say they'd heard stories about the young race that defeated an empire. They were worried we might be dangerous. Elena smiled slightly. Tell them we can be. Tell them about the Krefnock, about what happened and why. Tell them we prefer peace, but we're not afraid to fight for what's right. Mira translated, and the response came quickly. They say they understand. They want to meet us. They want to know more about the species that fights like demons and then builds like angels. Then let's give them a proper introduction. Elena looked out at the stars, at the infinite possibilities waiting in the darkness. Humanity has a lot of stories to tell. In the decades that followed, humanity's reputation spread throughout the galaxy. They became known as many things: explorers, traders, artists, scientists. They shared their music and their stories with species that had never imagined such things. They built bridges between civilizations that had been enemies for millennia. But they were also remembered as warriors, as the species that had crushed the Krefnock, as the descendants of creatures who had tamed fire and conquered worlds. New species joining the galactic community often asked about humanity. The older civilizations had learned to give the same answer, the same warning that the Vornathi had given long ago. The humans are friendly. They are curious and creative and endlessly adaptable. They make wonderful allies and fascinating friends. But do not anger them. Whatever you do, do not anger the humans. Some species listened. Some didn't. Those who didn't, well, they learned the same lesson that the Krefnock had learned. The same lesson that countless predators on ancient Earth had learned, when they discovered that the small, soft creatures walking on two legs were not as helpless as they appeared. Humanity was not prey. Humanity had never been prey. And when the darkness came, when the threats emerged, when the lines were crossed, humanity remembered what they were. They were the children of Earth, the heirs of creatures who had survived ice ages and mass extinctions, the descendants of hunters who had brought down mammoths with nothing but courage and sharpened sticks. They were human, and they were not to be trifled with. Epilogue, 100 years later. The Galactic Council chamber had changed much over the century. New species had joined, old powers had faded, and the galaxy itself had grown more peaceful under the watchful eye of its various civilizations. At the center of it all, humanity had carved out a unique position. They were not the most powerful species, though their military remained formidable. They were not the most ancient, though they had learned much from those who were. They were not the most numerous, though their population had spread across hundreds of worlds. But they were, in many ways, the heart of galactic civilization. Their music played in the courts of 1,000 species. Their art adorned the walls of museums on worlds they had never visited. Their stories, those wonderful, terrible, infinitely creative human stories, had spread to every corner of known space. And their reputation was something else entirely. Elder Mareth of the Vornathi, great-grandchild of the legendary Kveth, addressed the council on the occasion of the anniversary of humanity's first contact. 100 years ago, Mareth said, my ancestor stood before this body and issued a warning. He told you not to anger the humans. Many of you laughed. Many of you believed that humanity was too young, too weak, too insignificant to matter. The Krethnok do not laugh anymore. In the century since that warning, humanity has exceeded every expectation. They have become explorers of the unknown, ambassadors of peace, guardians of the weak. They have made the galaxy a better place through their creativity, their compassion, and their endless determination. But they have also shown what happens when they are pushed too far, when their families are threatened, when their principles are violated, when the line is crossed. Mareth's tendrils pulsed with the deep crimson of caution, the same color Kveth had used a century before. Let the lesson of the Krethnok stand for all time. Let every species that joins this community understand the truth that my ancestor tried to teach. The humans are not prey. They never were. Do not anger them. In the human delegation, Ambassador James Okonkwo, grandson of the legendary Sarah Okonkwo, smiled slightly. He had heard this speech, or versions of it, many times. It was something of a tradition now, a reminder of lessons learned and prices paid. But as he listened, he thought about his grandmother, about the sacrifice she had made, standing before this council and demanding justice, about the 50,000 who had died on New Helsinki, and the millions who had fought to avenge them. And he thought about Mira, now ancient and frail, but still sharp as ever, living out her final years on a peaceful world far from the horrors of her childhood. She had dedicated her life to communication, to understanding, to building bridges between species that might otherwise have been enemies. She had never forgotten New Helsinki. None of them had. But she had also never let it define her. She had channeled her pain into something productive, something that made the galaxy better rather than worse. That, James thought, was humanity's greatest strength. Not their weapons, not their tactics, not their terrifying capacity for violence. It was their ability to endure the worst that the universe could throw at them, and still find reasons to hope, to build, to grow. The humans were dangerous. That much was undeniable. They had proven it on the battlefields of the Krethnok War, and they had proven it again in the centuries since. But they were also kind, curious, creative, stubborn in ways that made others want to either strangle them or hug them, depending on the circumstance. They were, in short, human. And the galaxy was better for having them. The message of Kveth echoed through the centuries, passing from generation to generation across 1,000 worlds. Do not anger the humans. It became a proverb, a warning, a piece of wisdom that young diplomats learned before they learned anything else. But there was another message too, one that spread more quietly, more subtly, through the cultures that had come to know humanity best. If you treat them fairly, the whispers said, they will treat you like family. They will fight for you, die for you, rebuild with you when the fighting is done. If you need help, ask the humans. They can't always say yes, but they always want to. If you're lost and afraid, look for the human vessels. They'll bring you home. This was the truth that balanced the warning. Humanity was dangerous, yes, fearsome when roused, implacable when wronged. But they were also the species that had taken in refugees from a dozen different wars, that had shared their medicine with plague victims across the galaxy, that had sent their ships into danger again and again to rescue strangers they had never met. They were the warriors who beat their swords into plowshares when the fighting was done. The monsters who became gardeners when the monsters weren't needed anymore. They were human. And the galaxy had learned to be grateful for them. In the depths of space, somewhere on the edge of known territory, a human exploration vessel drifted through the darkness. Its crew of 53 souls had been exploring for nearly a year, mapping systems that had never felt the touch of civilization. On the bridge, Captain Marcus Stone III, great-great-grandson of the legendary admiral, watched the stars streak past. He was young for a captain, barely 30, but he had inherited his ancestors' steady hand and cold eyes. "Captain," his science officer reported, "we're detecting an anomaly, some kind of structure, artificial origin, very old." "How old?" "Based on the decay patterns, older than any known civilization, possibly millions of years." Stone leaned forward in his chair. "Set course. Let's see what we found." The ship altered its trajectory, heading toward the unknown, toward whatever mysteries waited in the darkness. Because that was what humans did. They explored, they discovered, they reached for the stars with both hands and refused to let go. And if something tried to stop them, well, the galaxy knew what happened then. Do not anger the humans. Nobody makes that mistake twice.